Growing up, my mom worked really hard to instill a love of reading within me. Some of my earliest memories are of us sitting down every single night after dinner and her taking the time to read to me and read with me. The Harry Potter series is one of my favorite books to this day, and it's not just because I think it's a good book, it's because that's one of the first series that I remember my mom reading to me and both of us loving. When I decided that I wanted to be a reading teacher, I ended up reaching out to my mom and I asked her to send me an email with a justification of why she loved reading so much. And I included an excerpt of that down here. But what it boils down to is my mom had a hard life growing up. And the only way that she knew how to escape that life was through reading. And she instilled that idea within me as well. So every single year, I do make sure to read this email to my kids so that they can understand that perspective. I want them to understand that reading isn't just for school, it can be an escape. And I credit that to my mom. Now, this is me as a student teacher, and I student taught in an ELA classroom. And this is me as a first year teacher. And I included these just because I think that the difference between these two teachers is very, very stark. And it's important to think about why I changed so much. These were the ideals that I held as I went into my student teaching and that very, very first day of my first year of teaching. I had some very important ideals that were who I was as a literacy teacher. And those were I wanted a diverse bookshelf. I wanted my students reading books that were not only windows, but they were mirrors. I wanted them to see other perspectives, but I wanted them to see themselves mirrored in the books that they were reading as well. So at the end of the day, I wanted every single one of my students to feel seen in my classroom, and I wanted to achieve that through the books that I provided them. And I also wanted writing to be a mode of power for them. I wanted them to be able to use their voice. I wanted them to write for a purpose and to see the purpose in writing, not just for a formal essay. Now, what I didn't think to account for as a student teacher and as a first year teacher was all of these things that ended up bogging me down as I got halfway through that first year. I really struggled as a literacy teacher when I got that first round of map testing and my kids didn't quote unquote grow as much as they were supposed to. And what ended up happening was I sort of lost who I was in favor of these scores that I was chasing. And I included, this is from my own personal Instagram stories off to the right. And it says, in all transparency, I cried 3 times today because my students didn't perform like I wanted them to on their standardized test that they took this week. And this is current. This was from the last year. So this idea is still taking place within me. And it's something that I still grapple with as a literacy teacher, how to balance that pressure of high stakes testing with all of the ideals that I hold really, really dear to my heart. And what happened, and what I kind of consider a failure of that first year, was I let this control everything until COVID hit. And this is the email that I sent to my kids in, I guess it was April, when we found out that we weren't going back into school after COVID. And that was my first year of teaching. And I included this just because I felt like COVID was a way that I got back to what was really important to me as an ELA teacher, as a literacy teacher. And what better way to stress that importance to my students was by writing. And I say in this first sentence, I say, since I spent the entire year telling y'all that writing is a powerful way to process even the strongest of feelings, I figured I would follow my own advice. And then I go on to tell them how much they mean to me and all of those important things. But the reason I included this was I felt like in its own strange way, COVID was sort of a blessing in disguise because it made me remember what was important. And that was first and foremost my students, but also all of these things. So I included that to say that I'm kind of in the middle now because I hold those ideals really powerfully. I still want a diverse bookshelf. I still want my students writing for purposes more than just the standards. But I also understand that there are realities that I have to deal with that I didn't account for when I was just a student teacher. And the way that I do that and the way that I seek inspiration is through the people that surround me. And those are the teachers on my hallway. And this quote up top says, sometimes the greatest PD is the teacher down the hall. And that's absolutely true for me. I get inspiration. I get ideas. I get a shoulder to cry on when I need it from these people around me. And that is how I learn how to be a better reading teacher and a better teacher in general for my students. So these are the ideals that I still hold. None of these have changed. They've just broadened. So not only am I teaching to these things, I'm also learning how to include even more important things. And that's things like connecting with my professors that I hold so dear that taught me how to be a teacher. That's coordinating with the University of Georgia and getting my students to share their writing and get feedback on their writing from actual college students. And that's pictured up here. That's having my students write about things that matter and share it with me and be excited about it. And most of all, that's about understanding that I am not ever done learning. I'm still really young. It's only my third year, and I am a lifelong learner, and I will never have this all the way down. But I feel like as long as I hold this idea to me close, then I think it'll turn out okay. And I'm going to leave it with this quote that I shared on my Instagram story, and it's from Kurt Vonnegut, and he gives some advice to some students that wrote to him. And he says, here's an assignment for tonight. Write a 6-line poem, but don't tell anybody what you're doing. Don't show it or recite it to anybody. Tear it up into teeny weeny pieces and discard them into widely separated trash receptacles. You'll find that you've already been gloriously rewarded for your poem. You've experienced becoming, learned a lot more about what's inside you, and you have made your soul grow. And I feel like that is what wraps it up. That is why we do this. That is why this job is so important to me. And it's that we want these kids to be chasing this ideal. We want them seeing the purpose of education. And if I can help them do that, then that is just icing on the cake.